Property development's really like farming. It's just that you only have one crop.
What's the biggest change you've seen over the years, do you reckon?
The acceptance of the lease concept in motels,
Yeah.
I think.
Ian taught a lot of accountants there wasn't just one asset here, there were two. That's the real key.
What would be your pearls of wisdom for people that are going down this path, for people that are involved in the industry? Welcome to Checked In with Resort Brokers. I'm Frank.
And I'm Trudy. Join us as we explore the intricate world of the wider Australian accommodation industry.
We're going to walk you through the ever-evolving landscape of hotels, motels, caravan parks, management rights and the communities, but most importantly, the stories that underpin them all.
From market trends and expert predictions to the incredible personal stories and lessons learned, we're going to cover it all.
Join us as we navigate this amazing industry together. Welcome to Checked In with Resort Brokers. I'm here with Managing Director of Resort Brokers, Trudy Crooks. My name's Frank Matus and I'm the host here for Checked In. I'm very excited to have one of our first episodes on this journey, to have our patriarch and founder of Resort Brokers, Ian Crooks, and one of his old-time friends, jousting partners and developers and man with wearing many, many hats, Malcolm Hall-Brown. So I'm going to ask Trudy to introduce these guys because you know them a lot better than what I do, right? And so over to you, Trudy Crooks.
We're at the chairman's table.
At the chairman's table, that's appropriate.
With us.
Exactly.
Ian, obviously, my father, the chairman of Resort Brokers.
It'd be remiss of us to have
he's
this.
got to be our first guest
Has
on
to
the
be.
podcast.
Yes.
I know when I asked Mel to come and join us, he said, well, surely your father's more interesting. I don't know if that's true, Mel, but he got you looking. And then, Mel, thank you so much for coming. We've known you for many years. We were just talking about how you and Dad first met many moons ago. For those of you who don't know you, they will by the end of this, but you started your life as an accountant, and then when you were going to retire from being an accountant, you decided that you were going to become a developer, and not just a part-time developer, but have done amazing developments. Raby Bay, How Can You Stay Away? The Mackay Marina precinct, and then currently you're doing North Harbour, which is a very, very impressive development in Burpengary, which just sits north of Brisbane, just on the way to the Sunshine Coast. You've sold 1,500 sites?
Yes, 1,500 blocks so far.
Yeah, and you're about 30% of the way through. There's going to be a marina there. So they are all spots that you are going to change the face of. Tell us what you look for when you saw those sites. What did you see and what made you think that there's going to be huge potential?
Well, the accounting practice and the development happened concurrently. I was in practice and one of my clients said, instead of charging your obscene hourly rate, why don't you come and look at Raby Bay as a potential partner? So we looked at Raby Bay. It was currently, at that time, it was owned by two Japanese banks and they were exiting Australia. We did an analysis, typical accountant, did all the numbers, went to the Japanese bank's representatives and they said, oh, we'll find someone to pay 4 times this price. So we just went away and put the file back in the filing cabinet. But 18 months later, they rang us again and they obviously hadn't found that person. So
your obscene hourly rate wasn't as high as you thought it was?
No, it was worth nothing.
It's interesting. We might have to write that down.
It was in that time when we had the recession we had to have by Paul Keating in 1991. So there were accountants in town in the Big 4 or Big 8 then it was, who were being sacked. And one bloke came into my office and he said, I was on 110 grand last week. If I want to stay, they've offered me 40.
Wow.
So it was a very severe recession.
And so with that, it's interesting that you say that up front because we see that we're in a changing market at the moment, and so with the cycles that you've seen, in the 40, Resort Brokers is coming up to its 40th year now. Between the two of you guys, what sort of, do you see the history repeating? Do you see cycles, coming around, as the name would say it?
Oh, unbelievably. I mean, there's been about 3 or 4 cycles, and I had 10 years in the real estate industry in New Zealand before I came here. So I've been there for 50 years and I've seen those cycles. But the time you talk about, the 89, 90, 91, that's the toughest time I've ever seen, Mel.
It was.
Shocking.
I remember I just sold a building on Gregory Terrace, and I wanted to keep my whole team together. We had about 12 or 13 accountants in my office, and I went without paying myself a salary for about 18 months because I wanted to keep this team together so that when we came out of it, we'd be ready to.
Yeah, all guns blazing with a team that's been, they've gone through the trenches.
Did you know it was going to, you were obviously confident that it was going to come back?
Well, it always does.
Yeah.
I mean, the great 87 crash in the stock market, if you look at it now, it's just a blip on the market. But I remember walking around Toowong in 1983 when the total market cap of BHP was $2 billion.
Wow.
And one of my clients at the time had bought 10 flats in St. Lucia for 400 grand. And he said, I've just got to get out of this. And he renovated the flats and sold them for 400 grand just to get out of it because the market was so
Just to
tight.
minimise the loss, really.
Just to minimise the loss. He couldn't sell them if they weren't renovated. But then there are other times when you see great opportunities during a recession, as we did in Raby Bay. I mean, we ended up buying this beautiful block of land for $224,000. And
I think my living room is worth that now.
it is. But the funny thing is I went to a valuer and I said, I want you to value this block of land. And he said, how much do you pay for it? And I said, 224,000. He said, what do you think it's worth? And I said, 2 million. He said, well, that's going to be a hard ask.
We have that conversation with valuers every day.
Anyway, he at least listened to my logic, and we ended up with a valuation for 2 million.
And what year was that, Mel? What
That
was
was 1993.
Right, so coming out of that really turbulent time. But I guess you just don't know when the beginning and the end of it is until retrospect, right?
Well, when we bought it, the site was a swamp, and the bulldozers hadn't gone in to manufacture the land. And the day the harbour had water in it, there were two big excavators digging out the final bund.
Oh, wow.
And the day the water came into the harbour, the real estate agent acting for the company had about 50 phone calls. They wanted to buy all this land.
Oh, wow.
But we'd bought it 9 months before, you see, when it was still a swamp.
Wow.
So it's taking on risk, isn't it? And opportunities that other people don't see.
Was it risk? I reckon that would have to have been a calculated risk.
Well, it was, I don't think it was risk, but a lot of other people saw it as risk.
I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, if you still go out there now, it's a wonderful precinct, isn't it?
It is a lovely precinct,
And
yes.
it's gone,
Did you guys know each other beforehand, or was that sort of the beginning of your relationship?
Mel and I were talking earlier before we came on air, and we sort of think we met about 1988 or 89. Mel came into an office we used to have in Indooroopilly, and that's how we first met. And then I remember going to Mel's beautiful colonial office on Gregory Terrace in Brisbane, and I'm not sure what we were talking about in those days, but
No, I can't
One
recall.
of the many ideas that maybe didn't happen. After Raby Bay, Mel, then did you get offered a whole lot of sites? Was Mackay Marina, was that the next big development you were involved in?
Well, Mackay Marina was interesting. It was subject to public expressions of interest, and we put in an expression of interest, but ours was a non-conforming expression. The government of the day wanted to offer the local developers a 25-year lease on the land and a 25-year lease on the water.
Right.
And I just said to my partners at the time, that won't work. No one can borrow money on a 25-year lease. So I said, we'll put in a non-conforming tender for a freehold title of the land and a 99-year lease on the water. And I'll never forget the first conversation I had in Mackay. One of the senior public servants said, it's very unlikely that you'll be considered because this will have to go to Cabinet. And my immediate response at the time was, well, isn't that what Cabinet's for?
I bet you got some blank expressions out of that one.
Well, there was a wonderful guy who was chairman of the Port Authority at the time called Ron Searle, and he picked up on my comment very quickly. And Ron was a very successful businessman, and he saw the sense in what I was saying. And when we eventually were accepted, after about 60 plane flights to Mackay over 3 years, we started work there in 1991, I think.
It's different now to what it was then, though. I mean, again, it's another one of those spots that you wouldn't have thought you're going to build one of the best marinas in the country.
No, it's a lovely spot.
Yeah.
And the city of Mackay have embraced Mackay Marina
Yes.
because the city has now used the vision of Mackay Marina as their promotional shots for the rest of the world. Which
Mackay is
Population of Mackay now.
it's about 80,000 or 85,000, but the region is
Huge.
a very successful region. And before I was an accountant, I studied economics and worked for an international insurance company, and that helped me enormously. And one of the things I did before we went to Mackay was to look at the Bureau of Statistics regional income per capita. And when I saw that Mackay was one of the wealthiest regions in the country, it pricked my interest, and I thought, well, this is an area that we really need to focus on. And I think Mackay still is one of the most progressive regions in the country.
Mackay's had a history of supporting the community to support itself. You know, in my former life, I helped run the Queensland Mining and Engineering exhibition up there. And so obviously, you know, mining is a big part of the community up in Mackay, but they've always been very good at supporting and promoting themselves. And I guess that's a point, Ian, when you've seen, you know, these cycles that we've gone through and various developments we've been in, and you being at the forefront of how leases have worked, is that engagement with the community a big part of what you've seen grow or change, or have people like Mal influence?
Well, I guess how the leasing concept started in New Zealand, because I bought the idea from New Zealand by saying to my wife one day, I'd like to live in Australia for a year to see if I could set up motel leasing. And she said, that's fine, as long as it's only for a year. And that was 39 years ago.
Right.
However, Mackay was always a fantastic motel town. And I went, Frank, when I started selling leases in Australia, and I had a proven track record of knowing what would last, and I did that by coming over to Australia a few times before I shifted here, and went around lots of motels in Queensland and New South Wales and introduced myself and said I was going to start a business, and did they have a profit and loss that I could, because I wanted to compare,
And
which
did
I
they
did.
give it to you?
Yeah, I did. I had 80 profit and losses, and that's how I worked out.
Found out where the rent considers a proportion.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
Really? Okay. So, and you're doing it live, I guess, you know, with real numbers at the time.
Yeah, that's right. And,
Yeah.
and today, 39 years later, I mean,
Still
that
stacks
formula still stands. you
Yeah,
know?
right.
But Mackay was a fantastic town for motels. Nevo Road,
Yep.
Mel, you know.
Well, Ian taught a lot of accountants that there wasn't just one asset here. There were two. There was an asset
That's
in
the kicker right there, isn't it?
that's the real key.
Yeah.
Because prior to Ian coming to do this, a lot of accountants would say, well, you've just got one asset.
Yeah, they would.
But you've really got two separate
And not put
assets.
Value on the goodwill and the chattels.
And
would
well,
they?
no, my idea was, Trudy, when also was that you could get younger people into the motel industry by selling just the business.
That's
part.
right.
And someone else could either keep the land and buildings or sell the land and buildings. And when I came here, there was lots and lots of older people in those days.
Because they had the money.
well, they owned the motel, Frank,
Yeah.
and they might have been retired cane farmers from Mackay, a lot of cane farmers in Mackay, and those sorts of people, and they couldn't sell their motels because they were in those days perhaps $1 million or $1.2
Yeah, so
million
price
dollars.
point away from people who want to
exactly.
run a 7-day-a-week business.
And
Yeah, right.
and the early leases that I sold in Australia, people only had to have 30 or 40,000 as a deposit.
Yeah.
You'd run this big property.
Yeah, and they could
you
run
could
this-
never
yeah.
afford to
How
do
much? How much push did you? I can imagine that first conversation. Where did that? How did that first conversation go? Hey, I got an idea, and I'm going to, separate out, and there's going to be business here for everybody. How did that first conversation go?
In New Zealand, it came about like this. I had a chap that I knew quite well, actually, through rugby union, because I'm a keen rugby union man. And
How'd you get that in
Yeah,
there,
that's right.
Alex?
Wallaby supporter, right? Yeah.
easy, Frank, easy. This chap said to me during the 70s and 80s, we had a prime minister called Muldoon, and he was in the National Party, but he was the most socialist National Party man I think any of us knew. But he made it very difficult to borrow money, and he used to bring in retrospective rules. I mean, and anyway, you couldn't borrow money, so we learnt to be traders. In other words, Frank, if you had something to sell, would you take this boat as part
So if
payment?
someone wanted income, you'd sell them a motel and they'd sell you their house.
Yeah,
kind of
that's
thing.
right. That's
Right.
right.
Or another investment. Yeah, right.
So anyway, this guy said to me he was going to sell his motel and he was going to trade a block of flats in a place called Porirua, which is north of Wellington. And I said, really? I said, what are you going to do with the flats? Oh, he said, I'll just try and resell them. So I said, the guy hasn't been able to sell them, so he's going to take your motel. You can't sell your motel, so you're going to take his flats. Why don't we just lease your motel, and then you can do with your land of buildings whatever you want? And it was a prime site on the water in Tauranga, nice part of New Zealand. And so that's really how it started. And from there, motel leasing moved forward. When I first came to Australia, I started the business on the 1st of October in 1985. And I just used to get up in the morning and call on motels. And for the first 12 years, I did 2,000 Ks a week, every week for 45 weeks of the year. Trudy was young. She would never have seen me, only at the weekends, because I was away all the time, knocking on doors and trying to tell people about motels. And in those days, none of the motel brokers did what I did, because I came from a farming background where I worked as a stock and station agency in the rural area, knocking on doors, and I had to make 30 calls. I had to make 20 calls a week, every week, face to face. And in those days, there were no mobile phones, so I'd be ringing the farmers the night before to say, I'm coming there, what time can I see you, and so on and so on. And a lot of them lived out of town, so I'd take bread and whatever else they needed.
It was all about developing that relationship.
That's right. And so when I came here, I thought that was a good opportunity to do exactly the same thing. And today,
We still do it.
we still do the same.
It still rings true. I mean, it comes
24.
down, like even though the mediums change, that relationship that you can
Exactly.
develop face to face is the cornerstone of the business.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also just the dirty little secret in all of this is it's all about relationships in the end,
People,
right?
Trusting people.
That's right.
You know
Yeah.
what I
One of
think-
my first runs,
Yeah.
I'll just tell you, was when I came here in October, about the second or third week, I met a guy from Ipswich that had a 17-unit motel called the Mary Allen. And he said to me, I've been trying to sell this motel. Do you think you can sell this motel? And it was showing a 20% yield. Excuse me, which if any of you know about the motel industry, was a fantastic yield because they sell at half that, or 10 or 12% today. So I said to him, have you ever thought about leasing? He said, how does that work? And I explained it. He told me. I sold his motel within about 10 days. So that was the first one I sold. And I made 5 sales between starting on the 1st of October and Christmas time. And that's just how it kicked off.
And this is how you convinced your wife to stay longer than the year.
Well, no, when we were here, Frank, and the following Easter, we'd been here 6 months, and we went back to New Zealand. Karen said, I'm not so sure that I want to come back here. She said, should we sell our house? And
there you were.
And there we
Do you
were.
know what is amazing about both those stories, right? Like then you went on and you went and met, I don't know if it was Mick Canavan at the NAB, and you actually managed to get the banks to lend against the goodwill of the lease.
I did.
These days, the idea of getting a valuer to tenfold what you paid for it you just wouldn't be seen, right? Everyone's so tied up in red tape. You were able to actually sit in front of them and argue the point of goodwill, which is true and proven many years later. Obviously different to do business there. People actually would listen to reason a bit more. You could get in front of the decision makers, do you think?
I think so, although now it depends on scale, of course. Now we're able to talk to national decision makers in the banks with the scale of the properties that we're doing, but it was very different when we started. I mean, Raby Bay, there were two of us, and as soon as I realised what we were about to do, I said to my partner Neil Morris, we better get a third partner, because if we don't, we won't have enough capital. We'll be borrowing too much money, and Ian knows how I hate borrowing too much money.
Yeah.
So Peter Hook came along, and all left-handed dyslexics.
Left-handed and dyslexic.
You can imagine the
That's an
conversation.
oxymoron, isn't it?
You can imagine the conversations when we get together, but sometimes we create magic. And so we all had our own professions. I was still running my accounting firm. Neil was running the Jetty Specialist, which is now a very large business servicing the marine industry across the east coast of Australia. And Peter was running a very successful furniture, kitchen manufacturing business. So because we all had our own businesses, we were able to do this project and not take any money out of the system.
Right.
So we started, as I said, 3 left-handed dyslexics with 50 grand each. And after we'd finished doing what we were doing there, 3.5 years later, after paying our tax, we had $6 million in the bank. So we were ready to start doing something serious.
Yeah, getting your teeth,
I mean, that would give
stuck
you
into
confidence.
it.
But North Harbour's so big, Mal. Every time you start something new, do you still have the same anxieties? Or do you obviously do a lot of research?
Yes, the anxiety never goes,
No.
but
And nor does the excitement, though, does it?
it's interesting. When you're on a long-term project, I liken it to a kid on a seesaw. You know, when you're walking up the seesaw and you get to the halfway point and then you go down.
That little bit of a
balance.
waver in the middle. Yeah.
But once you get past that wave, it's downhill. And we're just talking the other day about the momentum we're building at North Harbour, and I think we're at that point of difference now where
How deep are you into it now?
30%.
About 30%.
About 30%.
And so when's your goal to completion? It's obviously because it's such a big
it all
development.
it all depends on the bureaucrats in Canberra and in the state government.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We were very excited. Our marina paddock was, and I use the term paddock because I'm come from a farming
Yeah, fair
background.
enough.
And it's interesting, when I look at these paddocks, they are just the same as the paddocks in the bush. And property development's really like farming. It's just that you only have one crop.
Yeah, right.
The crop is you're building either factories or you're building blocks for housing.
That's an interesting analogy, bringing those two. You could go with what you know, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And as a kid, we had 150 acre paddocks. We had 4 acre paddocks. So as soon as I walk into a paddock, I can very quickly sum up how big it is because of my memory of driving tractors around various sized paddocks as a kid. And the one we're working on at the moment is about the same size as the Brisbane CBD. It's about 170 hectares.
Wow, that's a
Unbelievable
serious
out there.
patch.
That's
Yeah.
what I mean. It's unbelievable. What's the end vision for it, Mal? So the marina's going to be the last bit.
Yes, the marina will be the last bit, and we're persisting with the approval process, and we're hoping the federal government, EPBC, will give us that final approval later this year.
Amazing. harder to get this marina through than Mackay? Or was Mackay always going to be a marina development?
Well, Mackay was led by the government. That was the difference.
Yeah, okay.
Mackay wanted a marina. We led this project, and initially we had 9 of the 11 councillors against us. But the Coordinator General did an assessment after we did a $5 million environmental impact statement
Right, well,
about 18 years ago, and he recommended the project for approval.
Yeah.
And we're still persisting. It's almost 20 years since we
that
arrived on site.
Let me ask you guys a question. As you know, being in the industry for as long as you guys have, you've seen a lot happen. And to both of you, what would you know, we see the economy changing. We see builders and developers going through some challenging time, interest rate rises, the economy changing, possible changes of government coming up as well. From your experience, what would be your pearls of wisdom for people that are going down this path, for people that are involved in the industry? What would you sort of sum up as being some of the advice that you could give?
Well, I think you just do what you love doing. Doesn't matter what it is. I've never felt that I've been to work, which is incredibly fortunate.
it is.
Managed fortune, I'd say.
I'm a numbers freak.
Yeah.
You know, I actually learnt to read music before I could read a book.
Wow.
Because of my dyslexia. But nobody knew about dyslexia 65 years ago.
Yeah. Wow.
And I still hate reading. I mean, the only time I read is when I'm on holidays. And if I read 4 novels on holidays, I know I've had a very relaxing time.
That's 4 novels. You say you're speed reading as well.
Yeah.
I can barely listen to 4
I was
novels.
going to say, I can barely podcast.
But-
more, exactly.
Because I love numbers, and I've had some wonderful tutorials over the last 50 years, one of which I must recall was in the south of England. I was talking to a very successful property developer about feasibilities. And he said, forget about the feasibilities. He said, if it doesn't work on the palm of your hand, if you can't make 1 + 1 come to more than 4, don't do it.
That napkin-based calculation
Yeah, that's right.
It's almost trusting your gut there, isn't it?
No, but
Yeah.
that's the same, isn't it? I mean,
exactly
we
the
see
same,
all
I mean.
these really detailed P&L projections, but we can almost do the same thing, can't you?
Yeah, in the back of a
You
cigarette
really
pack.
can. You can stress test things pretty
Yeah.
quickly if
Absolutely.
you've got good knowledge.
How about yourself, Ian? What would be your advice for the people that are coming through?
Well, just I'm a bit like Mel. Just do what you love. I mean, I not so much now, but I never used to be able to wait to wake up in the morning to get going again. And I used to always leave home very early because I loved doing what I was doing. I loved talking to people. I loved offering opportunities. And in our business, really, technology hasn't changed our business much. It's like knocking on doors, talking to people,
Finding out what's motivating them.
That's right. Why did you buy this motel? Who did you buy it through? Would you buy another one? All of those sort of questions that,
Understanding what's driving them.
what's
and
driving
so on.
them. And
You'd almost think in our game, sometimes technology, people are resting on it too much, right?
yeah,
You know, we see it with on so much marketing, so many things coming at you, but it's actually the person at the end of the phone that you trust.
I think the
Who
biggest
talks
thing
about-
for me with technology is mobile phones. I mean, I used to have to leave Brisbane and I knew where all the red phone boxes were.
Right, along your route.
I'd be stopping to make calls for the next day, and you know, and so I used to know where they all were. And then, of course, when mobile phones came in, I was actually one of the luckiest people in Brisbane. I was in the first 100 to have a mobile phone. In my phone. It was the size of a brick. We all remember them. And I thought, how cool was I? And had a big aerial on the back.
Yes,
Mount.
remember one of those?
I used to take them in and out of my dad's car. And it took me half an hour to put them in.
Drive from Brisbane to the Gold Coast. There was only one spot where you pick up.
One spot with reception.
Actually having a phone box.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, but
What's the biggest change you've seen over the years, do you reckon? No, what's the
Oh,
biggest?
well, I think the acceptance of the lease concept in motels.
Yeah.
I think the way in management rights. I think the motel, the growth in management rights and the understanding and just how many management rights there are. I think when I might have first came to Queensland, there were less than 500 or 600 management rights. I understand there's well over 3,000.
Yeah, about 3,500. It's the $8 billion industry that nobody knows about.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. It sort of stemmed from that original concept of how to look at an asset and see it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
It was looking after a problem, wasn't it? Someone
That's
wants
exact-
someone to look after their properties, and it's a
Absolutely.
win-win for everyone.
Yeah.
What do you reckon the biggest changes are, Mal, that you've seen in what you do?
I think the biggest change for me is in communication. I remember having some important documents, and we gave the documents to one of the junior staff members and asked them to fly to Sydney, have them signed and come home. That was before faxes. And then, of course, faxes came in, and
Were they game
that was
changers?
magic.
Well, they were.
And now, of course,
DocuSign.
I can sign a document. My partner can sign a document in Italy while he's on holidays, and we get it back to where it needs to go in an afternoon.
Thank you very much for joining us here on Checked In with Resort Brokers. We're honoured to have you here, the chairman. Guys, if you have any questions for these guys or for ourselves, put the comments in the fields below. But once again, thank you very much for joining us on Checked In with Resort Brokers.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Checked In with Resort Brokers. If you enjoyed the insights from this episode, we'd love your support with a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And don't forget to hit subscribe on your favourite platform and stay connected with us on social media at Resort Brokers.
We're excited to continue this amazing journey with you. See you on the next episode.